The MSNBC debate that shocked the nation. Candace Owens versus Jasmine Crockett. The studio lights of MSNBC burned brightly as the debate stage came alive. Candace Owens adjusted her microphone, the poise she was known for slightly faltering under the heat, both literal and figurative. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat composed, a folder resting on the table, a subtle but telling smile curling at the edges of her lips. What was billed as a routine political debate on racial policy was about to become one of the most explosive televised moments in recent memory. We'll be right back with our special segment featuring conservative commentator Candace Owens and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Announced moderator Rachel Mitchell, a seasoned journalist respected for her sharp, no-nonsense style. As the broadcast cut to commercial, Owens casually leaned back and sipped her water. She had been in this arena many times before, debates where her fast-paced arguments and commanding presence usually won the day. But something about the confident calm in Crockett's expression unnerved her. Gasps rippled through the audience as Crockett laid out the contents, documents that exposed glaring contradictions in Owens' past statements. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in her televised career, Candace Owens appeared visibly shaken. Her composure unraveled as the revelation unfolded, marking a turning point in the debate, and perhaps in the public perception of both women. Candace Owens versus Jasmine Crockett, the showdown that redefined the debate. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of our high-stakes political coverage. What you're about to witness isn't just a debate. It's a historic confrontation that's rewriting the script on how politics is discussed on national television. Candace Owens, one of the most recognized conservative black voices in America, had carved out a powerful platform through viral videos, best-selling books, and relentless appearances on right-wing media. Known for her fierce criticism of progressive ideologies, especially on race, Owens had become a lightning rod in American politics. Her stance against victimhood culture made her a celebrated figure among conservatives and a frequent target of criticism from the left. At just 34, she had authored 2 bestsellers, built a media empire with her podcast, and cultivated a social media following in the millions. Her brand was rooted in a dramatic personal transformation, from liberal to conservative, often described in her own words as taking the red pill. That journey, which she claimed exposed her to the truth about what she called the Democratic plantation, became the foundation of her political persona. Across the stage stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Harvard-educated, 42, and forged not in the media spotlight, but in courtrooms and congressional chambers. A civil rights attorney before entering politics, Crockett spent years fighting for voting rights, justice reform, and police accountability. While Owens rose through commentary, Crockett's credibility came from real legal work, prosecuting misconduct, defending protesters pro bono, and navigating the front lines of systemic reform. Though not as widely known as Owens, Crockett had recently made headlines for her sharp and surgical questioning in congressional hearings, turning complex legal discussions into viral soundbites that showcased her depth, discipline, and command of the law. The highly anticipated MSNBC special, Beyond the Divide, Race in American Politics, had been promoted for weeks. The premise was simple but explosive: 2 powerful, eloquent black women on opposite ends of the political spectrum, facing off in a primetime debate. It was a ratings magnet, drawing interest from all sides: supporters, skeptics, and those hungry for real dialogue. For Candace Owens, it was another opportunity to reinforce her brand as the unapologetic truth-teller unafraid to challenge liberal narratives. She teased the debate on her channels for days, promising to bring facts over feelings and dismantle progressive talking points. But for Jasmine Crockett, this was about more than just politics. It was personal. She viewed Owens not just as a political opponent, but as a dangerous voice distorting the lived experiences of Black Americans for clout. To Crockett, this wasn't a show. It was a responsibility. What the public didn't know, and what Owens would soon discover, is that Crockett had been preparing meticulously for weeks. She wasn't just bringing opinions to the stage, she was bringing receipts. Jasmine Crockett unveils Candace Owens' past in debate Bombshell, unlike many of Candace Owens' critics who challenge her with emotional appeals or philosophical disagreements. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett came armed with something far more potent: documents, records, and direct evidence that cut through rhetoric and told a story starkly different from the image Owens has carefully cultivated. As the debate resumed after a commercial break, moderator Rachel Mitchell turned to the first question. Let's begin with a fundamental issue. How should America address the persistent racial disparities in economic opportunity? Owens, confident and composed, launched into her usual argument. The biggest challenge facing Black Americans today isn't systemic racism. That narrative is a mental trap designed to keep minorities feeling helpless. The real problems are the breakdown of the family, government dependency, and the culture of victimhood perpetuated by politicians like the Congresswoman. Crockett listened attentively, but didn't respond immediately when Mitchell turned to her. Instead, she calmly shifted the focus. Before I address Ms. Owens' comments about victimhood, she began, I think the American public deserves to know more about who is making these claims. Then came the moment that shifted the tone of the evening. Crockett opened a folder and carefully removed the first document. I have something here that may interest everyone watching tonight. The studio fell silent. The air grew tense as it became clear this was no longer just a policy debate. It was personal. Ms. Owens has built her brand on rejecting victimhood culture, Crockett said, her voice steady. She regularly condemns those who cite systemic barriers in minority communities. But what many don't know is that she once held very different views before her rise as a conservative figure. Owens shifted in her seat, visibly tense. My personal journey is well documented. I've never hidden. Let me finish, Crockett interrupted firmly. In 2015, you were the CEO of a blog called Degree 180, where you published multiple articles criticizing the Republican Party and Donald Trump. In fact, I have an article here, under your byline, where you refer to Trump supporters as a bunch of deplorable idiots and even compared Trump to Hitler. Moderator Mitchell raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent, letting the moment unfold. Those were opinion pieces on a group blog. Owens countered quickly. My political evolution has been open. I've spoken about it many times. What you haven't spoken about, Crockett replied, sliding another document across the table, is your 2016 attempt to launch Social Autopsy, a website designed to publicly expose people for online bullying by tracking their digital footprints. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Owens's expression tightened. That project was widely misrepresented by both the left and the right. Owens responded, her voice slightly less sure. It was about accountability for cyber harassment, which I've personally experienced. Crockett nodded slowly. So, you believe in accountability for harmful speech online? That's interesting because it aligns closely with what many progressives argue for, the very people you now label as snowflakes. The studio audience was hanging on every word. Mitchell attempted to redirect. Perhaps we should return to the question of economic opportunity. This is relevant, Crockett interjected. MS. Owens has made a career of telling Black Americans not to view themselves as victims of systemic racism, all while she reached into the folder again and pulled out another document. Filing a racial discrimination lawsuit against your high school, citing racist threats and harassment. A suit, I might add, that your parents filed with help from the NAACP. Owens's composure cracked. That lawsuit was filed when I was a teenager after receiving violent racist voicemails. Are you seriously using the fact that I experienced racism as a child against me? I'm pointing out the contradiction, Crockett said calmly. You sought justice and support from the very organization, the NAACP, that you now publicly attack as part of the problem. You sued for $37,500 claiming racial discrimination, while later telling others that systemic racism is a myth. The audience remained silent, but the atmosphere was electric. The debate was no longer about policy alone. It had become a public reckoning, an unmasking of contradictions in real time. And for once, Candace Owens had no viral soundbite that could cut through the gravity of what had just been laid bare. Candace Owens melts down as Jasmine Crockett unleashes receipts in live debate. The tension inside the MSNBC studio was palpable. What began as a policy discussion had escalated into a dramatic unraveling. Audience members sat frozen, uncomfortable, yet transfixed, as the confrontation between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Candace Owens grew sharper with every passing minute. Moderator Rachel Mitchell attempted to re-establish control. "Congresswoman, while that background is interesting," Mitchell said cautiously, "can you explain how it connects to current policy debates?" "It's directly relevant," Crockett replied, unwavering. "Because authenticity matters when we talk about policies that affect real people's lives. But if we want to shift to the present, I came prepared." She reached in her folder once again. "This," she said, holding up a transcript, "is from a private fundraiser Ms. Owens spoke at just 3 months ago. And I quote, 'These talking points work. They get engagement. But between us, the solutions are obviously more complex than what I can say on air. You're using stolen private communications to build a false narrative.' Ms. Owens, please." Mitchell tried to intervene, visibly rattled. "No," Owens barked, interrupting her. "I will not sit here while she uses illegally obtained materials to smear me. This entire event is a hit job." The cameras caught her face twisted in frustration, a stark contrast to her usually polished on-screen presence. A production assistant rushed onto the stage, whispering urgently to Mitchell. "We need to take an unscheduled break," Mitchell announced, her voice taut with tension. "We'll be back shortly." What viewers didn't see during the commercial break was even more intense. According to audience accounts, Owens ripped off her microphone, knocked over a water glass, and stormed toward Crockett, pointing and shouting, before security intervened. "Where did you get those? Who gave them to you?" she demanded as staff scrambled to restore order. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling, and the cameras weren't even rolling. When MSNBC returned from the extended commercial break, the change in atmosphere was unmistakable. Mitchell's hair had been hastily readjusted, her composure slightly shaken. Crockett remained in her seat, collected but firm. Owens had been moved further away from her, with a discreet security officer now stationed at the side of the stage. "Welcome back," Mitchell said, her voice tightly measured. "We want to remind viewers that tonight's debate is about important national policy. Both guests have agreed to continue the discussion with professionalism and respect." The camera panned to Owens. Her makeup had been touched up, but her expression betrayed a simmering mix of anger and unease that media polish couldn't fully mask. Before the break, Mitchell continued, "Congresswoman Crockett raised several concerns about Ms. Owens's background. Ms. Owens, would you like to respond?" Owens took a breath, attempting to reclaim her signature composure. "What we saw before the break is typical of the left," she said. "When they can't win on ideas, they resort to character assassination and the invasion of privacy. Nothing presented tonight changes the fact that liberal policies have failed Black Americans for decades." Mitchell turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman, do you stand by your decision to raise these personal issues during a policy debate?" "This isn't about personal attacks," Crockett replied evenly. "It's about credibility. If you're going to position yourself as a leader in the Black community, authenticity matters." She turned toward the camera. "And since we're talking policy," she continued, "let's be even more specific. I have here official government records showing that while Ms. Owens frequently criticizes government assistance as harmful and enabling dependency, her media company received a $186,000 PPP loan during the pandemic." The control room displayed the document on screen for viewers. It was irrefutable. Owens jumped in. "Many businesses took advantage of emergency programs during COVID. That loan was forgiven, just like others were." Crockett didn't blink. "And while you told Black Americans to reject government help, taxpayers were subsidizing your business. That's not just hypocrisy, it's deception." A murmur swept through the audience. But Crockett wasn't done. "I also have here a copy of your standard speaking contract," she continued, holding up another document. "It requires event organizers to provide first-class flights, luxury accommodations, and a minimum speaking fee of $50,000. even at college campuses where you lecture students about personal responsibility and the dangers of entitlement. Owens flushed again. Those terms are standard for people in my industry. They're not relevant to policy. They are, Crockett countered. When you're charging 5 figures to speak about financial hardship to young people who can barely afford tuition, it matters. You preach humility, but your business is built on elitism. The debate had begun as a discussion about racial policy. It had become something far deeper, a confrontation over truth, image, and the price of influence. And by the time the show ended, one thing was clear. Candace Owens' credibility had been publicly and powerfully challenged, not by outrage, but by evidence. Candace Owens silenced. Jasmine Crockett unleashes final blow in historic debate meltdown. The tension in the MSNBC studio had reached a fever pitch. But what came next would push the confrontation beyond anything viewers or the political world had anticipated. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett lifted yet another document from her folder, this time holding it toward the camera as it zoomed in. This is an internal email from Ms. Owens' publisher, she began. In this exchange, Ms. Owens explicitly instructs them to remove data about racial disparities in healthcare outcomes, writing, and I quote, "It doesn't fit the narrative I'm trying to build." A collective gasp swept through the studio. Even veteran moderator Rachel Mitchell looked momentarily stunned. "This is about truth," Crockett said, her voice steady but growing in force. Ms. Owens tells Black Americans their experiences with racism are imagined. Yet privately, she acknowledges those realities and then actively hides the evidence that supports them. For the first time in her public career, Candace Owens was silent. Her signature confidence dissolved into visible confusion as the camera caught her frozen, struggling to respond. When she finally did speak, her voice lacked its usual command. Those communications are taken out of context. Publishing decisions are always complex. The context is clear in the full email chain, Crockett replied, sliding the entire thread toward Mitchell. You specifically requested that statistics about Black maternal mortality rates be removed because you feared it would give ammunition to the systemic racism narrative. Recognizing the moment's significance, Mitchell asked, "Ms. Owens, did you make that request?" Silence fell across the studio. The camera zoomed in on Owens, whose blank expression revealed the weight of the moment. After several long seconds, she managed only. Editorial decisions are made collaboratively with publishers. Even Mitchell, who had moderated presidential debates, struggled for words. "This is extraordinary. Ms. Owens, would you like to respond?" What happened next would be replayed across the internet for days. Candace Owens stood abruptly, her chair crashing backward to the floor. Her voice cracked with rage. "This entire setup is a disgrace," she shouted. "You've ambushed me with stolen private communications. This is not journalism. It's character assassination." She turned off stage, shouting to someone presumed to be her manager. "We're done here. This violates everything we agreed to." Then she turned directly to Crockett. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys. This is slander." She yanked off her microphone and dropped it to the floor with a sharp thud. Before storming off, she pointed at Mitchell. "And you let this happen. MSNBC will regret this hit piece." Security quickly stepped in to prevent further escalation as Owens exited the stage, her face twisted in fury. Mitchell turned back to the camera, her voice tight with tension. "We're going to take another break. Please stay with us." As the broadcast cut to commercial, the damage was already done. Candace Owens, famous for her cold control and media-savvy presence, had unraveled on live television. Her brand of unshakable certainty had collapsed in a matter of minutes, and the internet wasted no time. Even before MSNBC returned from break, the meltdown was viral. Clips of Owens shouting, knocking over her chair, and storming off spread like wildfire. In less than 20 minutes, hashtags like #OwensMeltdown and #CrockettReceipts were trending across every major platform. Millions of views poured in as users replayed the stunning scene in real time. When the show returned, viewers were met with a stark contrast. Rachel Mitchell, sat alone at the anchor desk. "As you can see," she said with practiced calm, "Ms. Owens has chosen to exit the program. Congresswoman Crockett remains with us to continue the discussion." The camera shifted to Crockett, still composed, seated in her original position, her documents neatly organized in front of her. "Congresswoman, any thoughts on what just transpired?" Mitchell asked. "I didn't come here seeking this outcome," Crockett replied, her tone measured. "But if we're going to have national conversations about race, equity, and policy, they must be rooted in truth. The American people deserve facts, not filtered narratives." And with that, the political world erupted. Commentators, columnists, and voters across the spectrum weighed in. Some praised Crockett's composure and preparation. Others criticized the moment as too personal. But no one could deny what had happened. Candace Owens had been confronted, factually, forcefully, and publicly, and for the first time, she had no rebuttal. After the firestorm, Candace Owens faces career fallout after Crockett confrontation in the aftermath of one of the most explosive televised political moments in recent history. Conservative commentators scrambled to respond, divided sharply into two camps. Some leapt to Candace Owens's defense, framing the confrontation as a political ambush. The left can't win on substance, so they resort to character assassination and invading privacy, tweeted one prominent right-wing pundit. But others, particularly longtime conservative commentators who had once competed with Owens for influence, were far less sympathetic. One seasoned voice wrote bluntly, "This is what happens when your brand is built on performance, not principle. Authenticity matters." Progressives were equally divided. Many celebrated what they saw as a long-overdue reckoning. One viral tweet summed up the sentiment. Crockett brought receipts, and Owens couldn't handle the truth. Others, while acknowledging the significance of the revelations, expressed unease over the use of private communications. By the next morning, major networks had picked up the story. Headlines ranged from media star melts down on live TV to political theater in the age of authenticity. Virtually every outlet played Owens's dramatic exit, often juxtaposed with past clips of her mocking opponents for being too emotional or lacking composure. The political consequences came quickly. Conservative groups that had scheduled Owens for future speaking engagements quietly scrubbed her name from their websites. A publishing deal for her third book was abruptly paused. Most telling of all, the television network that had been in final negotiations for Owens to host a primetime show released a terse statement. "We are reviewing our programming slate and have no announcements at this time." Translation: the deal was dead. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett found herself suddenly propelled to national prominence. Her congressional office was flooded with interview requests. Major newspapers sought her views, not just on race and justice, but on the state of political integrity. One moment, in particular, went viral, a clip of Crockett calmly stating, "The truth doesn't need performance. It just needs to be spoken." Within 24 hours, that single line had been shared more than 300,000 times. According to analytics, the confrontation amassed over 40 million views across social platforms within 48 hours, cementing it as one of the most watched political showdowns of the year. Comment sections were flooded with reflections on authenticity, accountability, and the growing demand for transparency in public life. Younger voters don't expect perfection, a media analyst explained on a cable news panel, but they do expect authenticity. What they saw was a clash between a manufactured persona and someone who brought the facts. By the third day, analysis turned toward the psychological dimensions of the moment. Body language experts broke down Owens's shift from control to collapse. Communication strategists highlighted Crockett's deliberate pacing and evidence-driven argumentation. "What we witnessed was a person unprepared for the loss of narrative control," said one political psychologist. When your influence relies on curated identity, evidence that disrupts that image can create profound cognitive dissonance. And the damage to Owens was real and possibly career-defining. After 2 days of silence, Owens finally addressed the situation in a video posted to her social media accounts. Gone was her typical studio polish. The video appeared to be filmed in a hotel room, with dim lighting and no makeup team. This was a calculated character attack, she claimed. Private communications were leaked without authorization. I intend to pursue legal action against MSNBC and Congresswoman Crockett. But legal experts were quick to note that everything presented in the debate appeared lawfully sourced. Government loan records were public. The fundraiser audio came from an attendee, and internal publisher emails were reportedly provided by a source within the company. There's no legal basis for a lawsuit here, a media law professor said on air. Public figures, especially those discussing public policy, have limited privacy protections when it comes to material relevant to their public claims. While Owens's core supporters stood by her, much of the conservative establishment began to distance itself. Influential outlets went quiet. Invitations to headline events disappeared. The silence spoke volumes. Crockett, by contrast, chose not to take a victory lap. In a widely praised interview 3 days later, she said, "This isn't about personalities. It's about making sure our national conversations are grounded in fact, not branding." The confrontation soon became a case study in political communication. Journalism schools added the debate to curriculum modules on media ethics and fact-checking. Communications consultants began offering what they dubbed the Crockett method, a framework centered on preparation, composure, and the power of documented truth. Polls showed measurable impact. A nationwide survey conducted a week later found that 64% of Americans who had watched the exchange believed it was a crucial moment in holding public figures accountable for consistency between private beliefs and public statements. She received offers from major think tanks and law firms. Her name began circulating among Democratic strategists as a rising star with potential for higher office. 6 months after the debate, both Owens and Crockett were invited to speak at a high-profile political conference. Owens declined. Crockett accepted and used her keynote to focus entirely on policy, never once referencing the confrontation that had changed everything. But the legacy of that night reached far beyond either woman. The showdown sparked a national conversation about the integrity of public discourse in the age of personal branding. In a time when personas are curated and outrage is monetized, one thing still cuts through the noise: receipts. And Crockett had them. Even years later, pundits would reference dramatic political implosions by saying that was almost an Owens-level meltdown. Because in today's political battlefield, the sharpest weapon isn't a clever insult. It's the truth you can prove. We deliver sharp, in-depth analysis of today's most pivotal political moments, cutting through the spin to uncover the truth behind the headlines. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss a breakdown, and share this video with others who value smart, fact-driven commentary. Because in a world full of noise, truth still matters. And we're here to bring it to you, one political clash at a time.